That man isn't a stranger, Lily. He has the same scar on his left hand that Dad had, the one from the accident nobody ever told us the truth about. Chapter 1. The Beggar at the corner of 5th and Grace. The morning fog off the East River had not yet burned away when the black SUV pulled up to the curb on East 73rd Street, and Ethan Whitmore stepped out onto the sidewalk with the particular expression of a boy who had spent the entire ride from the Upper East Side pretending to read his phone, while actually thinking about something else entirely. His sister Lily was already on the sidewalk, her school bag slung over one shoulder, her dark hair pulled back in the way she did when she wanted to signal that she was not in the mood for conversation. They were 14 years old, the two of them, and they moved through the world with the careful coordination of people who had spent their entire lives sharing the same space, not quite finishing each other's sentences, but always knowing without looking exactly where the other one was standing. "You forgot your lunch again," Lily said, not looking at him. "I didn't forget it. I left it on purpose. The chef put kale in the sandwich." "Kale is nutritious." "Kale is a punishment food. People eat it because they think suffering builds character." Lily almost smiled. She turned instead toward the school gate, and Ethan fell into step beside her, and for a moment the morning was entirely ordinary. The traffic noise of Manhattan, the smell of coffee from the cart on the corner, the low gray sky overhead pressing down on the tall buildings like a hand trying to hold something in place. That was when Ethan saw him. The man was sitting on the low stone ledge at the corner of 5th and Grace, the narrow cross street that ran behind the school's east wall, in the place where the shadow of the building stayed longest in the morning. He was wearing a canvas jacket that had once been olive green and had faded to something closer to the color of old cement. His jeans were dark with grime at the knees. He had a paper cup set on the ledge beside him, not asking for anything, just sitting with his hands loose between his knees and his head tilted slightly forward, the way people sit when they have been sitting in one place for a very long time, and the act of sitting has stopped being rest and become simply existence. Ethan would have walked past him. He had walked past dozens of men like this in his 14 years in New York City, had learned the particular city skill of letting his gaze slide off without landing, the way water runs off glass. He was already 3 steps past the corner when something snagged at the edge of his vision and pulled him sideways and back. The man had shifted his weight. He had reached down to pick up the paper cup, and in doing so, his left hand had turned palm outward for just a second, and the morning light, thin and gray as it was, had fallen on the back of that hand and lit up the scar. It was not a dramatic scar. It was not the kind that people notice and ask about. It ran along the outer edge of the left hand from the base of the little finger to the wrist, smooth and slightly paler than the surrounding skin, the shape of it slightly curved, like a new moon laid flat. It was the kind of scar that a person forgets they have after enough years, because it becomes simply part of the landscape of the hand. Ethan had seen that scar once, in a photograph. One photograph specifically. The one he kept folded in the inner pocket of the notebook he carried everywhere. The one that Lily did not know about, or at least had never acknowledged knowing about, which in their private language meant the same thing as not knowing. The photograph was old enough that the color had shifted slightly toward yellow at the edges. It showed a man holding 2 very small children on the steps of what appeared to be a house somewhere with a front porch and a yard, which was not where Ethan and Lily lived now, and had not been for as long as either of them could remember. The man in the photograph was laughing, his head thrown back, one arm around each child, and his left hand was visible at the edge of the frame. And on the back of that hand, in the particular angle of the light that afternoon, you could see the scar. Ethan stopped walking. Lily had taken 4 more steps before she realized he was no longer beside her. She turned. "Ethan." He did not answer. He was looking at the man on the ledge. Lily walked back to him, lowering her voice without being told to. "What is it?" "That man," Ethan said, keeping his voice at a register that barely moved the air between them. "That man isn't a stranger, Lily. He has the same scar on his left hand that Dad had. The one from the accident nobody ever told us the truth about." Lily looked at the man. She looked for long enough that Ethan could see her doing the thing she always did when she was taking information seriously, which was to go very still the way water goes still before something moves beneath it. "You're looking at a scar on a homeless man's hand," she said, "and concluding it's our father." "I'm not concluding anything. I'm telling you what I see. Lots of people have scars. In that exact location, that exact shape." Lily was quiet for a moment. The man on the ledge had not moved. He was looking down at his cup now, and he had not looked up at them, which might mean nothing or might mean everything. In Ethan's experience, people who were truly unaware of being watched did not hold quite so still. "Don't go over there," Lily said. "I'm not going over there. I'm just standing here." "You're about to go over there." Ethan considered this. He took a step toward the corner. The man on the ledge went very still in the way that animals go still when they hear something, not the stillness of calm, but the stillness of attention. The whole body organizing itself around a single point of focus, while every other process slows to nothing. He did not look up. He kept his eyes on the cup. But the quality of his stillness changed, and Ethan felt it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, something in the atmosphere shifting without any visible cause. Ethan stopped. He was close enough now to see the man's face beneath the overhang of unkempt dark hair going gray at the temples. The jaw was rough with several days of beard. The cheekbones were more visible than they should have been, and there were lines around the eyes that Ethan had no photograph to compare to because the photograph showed a man younger than this one by 10 years at minimum. But the architecture of the face, the particular angle of the jaw, the way the brow sat over the eyes, did something to Ethan's chest that he did not have a clean word for. It was not recognition exactly. It was more like the moment when you hear the opening notes of a song you have not heard since childhood, and your body responds before your mind has time to catch up. The man raised his eyes. For 1 second, not more than 1 second, they looked at each other. And in that second, Ethan felt the same thing happen in the man's face that he could feel happening in his own. The involuntary contraction, the rush of something that was either joy or terror or both at once. The way every prepared thing a person has rehearsed falls away when the real moment arrives. Then the man looked back down at his cup. He did not speak. He did not move. He was, to all external observation, simply a man sitting on a ledge who had glanced up at a passing child and glanced back down again. But his left hand, Ethan noticed, was trembling. Lily appeared at Ethan's shoulder. She had come up silently, which was a thing she did and had always done, appearing at his side at exactly the moment when he needed a second opinion or a second body to stand with. "The bell's going to ring," she said. "I know. We have to go in." "I know that too." She looked at the man on the ledge for another moment. Then she looked at Ethan. Something passed between them that they did not say out loud. The twin shorthand that they had developed so early in life that neither of them could have traced its origins. The private language of two people who had shared every formative experience and calibrated themselves against each other since before memory began. "Okay," she said, "but we don't say anything yet. To anyone." Agreed. They went into school. Ethan sat through first period looking at the same page of his history textbook for 45 minutes without retaining a single word. Lily, he suspected, had done something similar in her English class across the hall, though if asked, she would have claimed to have taken excellent notes. At lunch, they sat at their usual table in the corner and did not discuss what had happened, which was its own kind of discussion, the way two people who have agreed to wait can talk about waiting without using any of the words. It was Lily who spoke first, finally pushing her food around her tray with a fork and not looking at him. "I want to see the photograph," she said. Ethan reached into the inner pocket of his notebook without a word and laid the folded photograph on the table between them. Lily unfolded it with careful fingers and studied it for a long time. She studied the man's face. She studied the children on the steps. She studied the left hand at the edge of the frame, the scar pale against the knuckles in the old afternoon light. She folded the photograph back up and slid it across to Ethan. "We go back after school," she said. "We see if he's still there. And if he is," Lily picked up her fork again, "then we figure out what we're dealing with." Outside on the stone ledge at the corner of 5th and Grace, Daniel Whitmore had not moved. He sat with his paper cup between his hands, and he was staring at the school gate with an expression that no passerby paused to read, because passers-by did not pause for men who sat on ledges in canvas jackets with dirty knees. But if anyone had paused, if anyone had stood still long enough to look at his face rather than through it, they would have seen something in his eyes that did not belong to a man with nothing. They would have seen the look of a man who has been waiting for exactly this moment for a very long time, and who is now terrified with every fiber of his prepared and careful self that it has arrived too soon. His left hand was still trembling. He pressed it flat against his knee and held it there, the scar against the denim, and he made himself breathe slowly. Slowly. One breath and then another. He had a plan. He had been building the plan for 2 years, collecting the pieces the way you collect evidence, carefully, one item at a time, never taking more than could be concealed, never moving faster than the system could track. He had 8 more weeks. 8 weeks, and the file would be complete, and the lawyer would have everything he needed, and Marcus would have no room left to maneuver. 8 weeks. He had been in this city for 4 months, moving between shelters and the few street locations where people did not look too closely at faces because Manhattan was enormous and nobody looked at anyone directly, and this particular corner had been a calculated risk that he had decided was worth taking, because the alternative, not seeing them, had stopped being bearable somewhere around month 3. He had not intended for the boy to see the scar. He had turned his hand at the wrong moment, and the boy had been looking, and now everything was different in a way that could not be made undifferent. The girl had looked at him too, though differently, more measuring, more contained, the way the girl had always been in the few years of her life that he had been present for. She had been like that at 4 years old, sitting in her high chair and looking at the world with those dark eyes as if she were taking inventory. Daniel closed his own eyes for a moment. 14 years old. They were 14 years old, and he had missed 10 of those years, and they looked like him, both of them. The boy especially around the jaw and the eyes, but Lily had his stillness, the particular quality of attention that he recognized as his own, because his mother had told him about it when he was young, had said, "You look at everything like you're reading it." And now Lily looked at the world the same way. He had a plan. He pressed his hand against his knee and told himself firmly and precisely that the plan still held, that 8 weeks was not a long time, that the children were safe as long as Marcus did not know they suspected anything, that the safest thing, the only safe thing, was for them to go inside the school and forget what the boy had seen. The school bell rang in the distance, faint and clear, and the street outside the gate emptied of children, and Daniel was alone on the corner again, with his paper cup and his plan, and the trembling in his left hand that had not stopped. He had a plan. He was no longer entirely certain the plan was going to survive the afternoon. Marcus Whitmore's office on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Industries Tower on Park Avenue was a room that had been designed to make visitors feel small without quite being able to explain why. The ceilings were high, the desk was broad and dark, and the window behind it framed a view of Midtown that stretched in every direction until it became simply sky. A view that placed Marcus at the center of a grid and made everything else appear to converge on the point where he sat. He was reviewing the quarterly projections when his phone buzzed with a message from the man he paid to watch the school on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The man whose only job was to make sure that nothing unexpected occurred in the 3-block radius around the children's daily routine. The message said, "The Whitmore boys stopped at the southeast corner to look at a vagrant. Stood there approximately 90 seconds. The girl came back to stand with him. They went inside after the bell. The vagrant is still on the ledge." Marcus read this twice. He set the phone down and looked at the view of Midtown for a moment, and then he picked the phone up again and typed, "Send me a photo of the vagrant." The photo arrived 40 seconds later. It was taken from across the street, slightly blurred by the distance, but the resolution was sufficient. Marcus looked at the man on the ledge, the overgrown hair, the gray at the temples, the canvas jacket, the paper cup, and then he looked at the left hand resting against the man's knee. He enlarged the image. He looked at the hand for a long time. Then he put the phone face down on the desk and sat very still in his expensive chair, and the view of Midtown went out of focus around him, and for the first time in 4 years, Marcus Whitmore felt the specific quality of fear that arrives not when danger appears, but when you realize the danger has been present far longer than you knew. He had believed he had been certain that Daniel was in Portland. His people had tracked into a shelter there 6 months ago and had reported nothing since, which Marcus had interpreted as Daniel staying put and keeping his head down, as Daniel had been doing for the better part of a decade. Broken and directionless, and nowhere near New York. He had been wrong. He reached for his phone again and dialed a number he kept in memory rather than in his contact list. "The situation I told you we'd never have," he said when the line connected. "We're having it. I need to know everything you can find about a vagrant currently located at the corner of 5th Avenue and East 73rd Street. Everything. Today." He ended the call and looked at the photo again, at the hand, at the scar. He had hoped in the back of his mind that 10 years of that life would have finished what the accident started. Bodies failed. Spirits broke. Men who lived without resources and without hope tended to disappear from the world by degrees, and Marcus had told himself that the disappearance was inevitable, that eventually the situation would resolve itself the way uncomfortable things sometimes did, quietly, without requiring him to act. Daniel Whitmore was 41 years old, sitting on a ledge in Manhattan, and his children had stopped to look at him. Marcus typed a second message to the man watching the school. "The twins are not to leave the building unescorted this afternoon. If they attempt to go to that corner after dismissal, redirect them home. Do not let them approach that man." He sent the message and then sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about 8 things at once. The way he had always thought. The way their father had always praised in Marcus and said was the mark of a real executive. The ability to hold a crisis in multiple dimensions simultaneously and not panic. He was not panicking. He was, however, making a new calculation. One he had hoped never to need. Chapter 2. What the Lawyers Don't Say. 3 days passed before Ethan and Lily were able to get back to the corner. This was not an accident. Their afternoons for those 3 days were structured with a precision that neither of them had previously noticed because they had never previously tried to go anywhere unannounced. On Tuesday, there was a car waiting at dismissal. Not the usual driver, Marcus's personal driver, a man named Pavel, who had the particular quality of attentiveness that suggested he was being paid to notice things. On Wednesday, their Aunt Diana materialized at the school gate 20 minutes before dismissal and walked them to her car with the cheerful purposefulness of someone who had been told to collect them and was executing that instruction carefully. On Thursday, Pavel again. "He knows," Ethan said on Thursday evening, speaking quietly in the doorway of Lily's room, while their housekeeper moved around the kitchen at the end of the hall. "He doesn't know what we know," Lily said. "He knows we looked at someone on a corner. That could be anything. Then why the escorts?" Lily sat on the edge of her bed, her school books open and ignored around her. She had been thinking about this in the organized way she thought about difficult problems, not circling them with anxiety, but mapping them the way you map a city, identifying the major intersections first. "Because Marcus is careful," she said. "He's always been careful. About everything. Remember how he reacted when we tried to look through Grandfather's old office? We were 10. We were just curious." He didn't react like we were just curious. He reacted like we had done something that needed to be contained. Ethan leaned against the door frame. "So we need to be smarter than the escort. We need to not go back to the corner," Lily said. "Not yet. Not the obvious way." She paused. "He's been there before. If he's been on that corner on mornings when you didn't notice him, he'll be there again. We need to find a different time." This was the thing about Lily that Ethan relied on in the same way he relied on gravity. She took the information available and derived the next step from it rather than from hope. He had spent 3 days wanting to go back to the corner. She had spent 3 days planning when and how. "Saturday," she said. "We tell Marcus we're going to the library on East 79th. That's 3 blocks from the school. We can cut down." Ethan nodded. "And if he's not there, then we find out where else he goes." She looked at him evenly. "We're not giving up on this because a driver is watching us." Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of late October day in New York that felt like the city was trying to make up for something. Ethan and Lily left the townhouse on East 68th Street at 9:30 with their library cards in their pockets and their school bags on their backs. And Pavel watched them from the doorway with the expression of a man who was professionally neutral about everything but personally suspicious of 14-year-olds carrying backpacks on weekends. They went to the library. They checked in. Lily checked out a book she did not intend to read, and then they went out the library side exit onto the cross street and walked quickly east to the corner. He was there. He was in the same position as before, on the ledge, the paper cup, the canvas jacket. But the jacket today had a wool scarf tucked around the collar against the cold, and he was reading a folded newspaper or holding one open with the posture of reading, while actually, Lily noted, watching the street over the top of it. They approached without trying to be casual because trying to be casual was the thing that attracted attention. They simply walked up to the corner and stopped standing at the edge of the ledge with the natural confidence of 2 children who belonged in every neighborhood in Manhattan and knew it. The newspaper lowered slightly. Daniel's eyes appeared above the fold. He looked at them for a moment in which his expression did the thing it had done on Tuesday. The involuntary opening followed by the controlled closing. The way a door starts to move in a draft and then is caught. "Good morning," Ethan said. The man said nothing. "We're not here to cause any trouble," Lily said, which was the thing she had decided to open with because it was accurate and because it established the terms immediately. "We have a question. One question. You don't have to answer it." The man looked at her, then at Ethan, and then back to the newspaper as if finding the news more pressing. The newspaper was 4 days old, Ethan noticed. The date was visible at the top of the page. "We have a photograph," Ethan said. "I'd like to show it to you, just to show you. You don't have to say anything about it." Long pause. The traffic moved on Fifth Avenue at the normal density for a Saturday morning. A woman walked past with a stroller. A man in running clothes turned the corner at pace and was gone. The city continued to operate at its habitual volume, indifferent to everything happening on this ledge in this small pool of October light. The man folded the newspaper. He set it on the ledge beside him. He looked at Ethan with an expression that Ethan could not immediately name, but that lived in the same territory as the look his history teacher got when a student asked a question that the teacher had been hoping would not be asked. The look of a man who has prepared for many contingencies and has just encountered the one he prepared for most carefully, and is discovering that preparation and readiness are not the same thing. Ethan reached into the inner pocket of his notebook and took out the folded photograph and held it out. The man did not take it. He looked at it, just looked at the edges of it, the yellowed corners, the precise fold. And then something happened in his face that he did not manage to contain in time. It was small. It was the kind of movement that most people would not have cataloged as an expression at all. A slight compression of the muscles around the eyes, a barely perceptible tightening at the corners of the mouth. But Ethan had spent 14 years reading faces in the absence of data, constructing a picture of his father from nothing more than one photograph and a handful of secondhand stories. And he recognized the expression the way you recognize music you have never heard performed, but know from a recording imperfect, mediated, but unmistakable. The man knew the photograph. "That's all we need to know," Lily said quietly. "You don't have to say anything else right now." The man looked at her. His jaw was tight. His hands were very still now, which was the opposite of the trembling Ethan had noticed on Tuesday, and Ethan understood instinctively that the stillness was costing him something. "You should go to the library," the man said. His voice was low and rough, slightly hoarse, but the accent was clear. The same East Coast cadence, the same inflection pattern that Marcus had, and that the few recordings Ethan had found of their father also had. "You said you were going to the library." "We did go to the library," Lily said. "We checked out a book and everything." A long moment of silence. "Smart," the man said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite humor, but was adjacent to it. The tone of someone who is trying not to be fond of a thing and is failing. "We'll come back," Ethan said. He refolded the photograph and put it back in his pocket. "We're not going to do anything you don't want us to do, but we'll come back." They walked away. Ethan counted to 40 before he allowed himself to look back. The man was watching them go. He was not pretending to read the newspaper. That same Saturday at 11 in the morning, Marcus Whitmore had a meeting in his home office that was not on any calendar. Raymond Holt was 73 years old, and he had been a partner at Holt and Sinclair Estate Law for 41 of those years. And he had the look of a man who had spent 4 decades sitting across from people in their worst moments and had developed a particular form of armor, not coldness exactly, but a careful, neutral quality, as if he had decided a long time ago that the safest way to exist in other people's crises was to be the still point around which everything else moved. He had been their grandfather Arthur Whitmore's attorney. He had also been, for a period of several months, approximately 11 years ago, something more than that, which was why Marcus had taken over the relationship after Arthur's death and kept it close. Lily heard the meeting by accident. She had come to the townhouse with Ethan after the library Marcus had the children every other weekend, a schedule established by the custody arrangement and reinforced by Marcus's consistent presence at every pickup and drop-off. And she had gone upstairs to retrieve her phone charger from the room she used when she stayed over, and in doing so, had passed the door of the study, which was not fully closed, and had heard Raymond Holt's voice say clearly and without ambiguity the words, "biometric documentation." She stopped outside the door. "The archive is sealed," Raymond Holt's voice was saying. "I've told you this before, Marcus. The sealing protocol was Arthur's instruction, not mine. I don't have the authority to unseal it unilaterally, and frankly, I'm not certain I would if I did. I'm not asking you to unseal anything. Marcus's voice was the one he used when he was calm, in the specific way that meant he was working at being calm. I'm asking you to confirm that the seal is still intact, that the documentation is where it should be, that there is no outstanding access request. A pause. The seal is intact, Raymond said. There has been no access request. And the biometric requirement. That's still the only method of activation. That was Arthur's specific instruction. The biometric keys are, as you know, unique. I don't imagine that's changed. No, Marcus said. I imagine not. Another pause, longer. Lily pressed herself flat against the wall outside the door and breathed in a very shallow way, which she had read once was what people did when they were trying not to be heard, and had understood immediately was not about volume, but about the instinct not to take up space. Marcus, Raymond said, and his voice had changed slightly, had taken on a texture that was not quite confrontational, but was no longer entirely neutral either. I want to say something to you that I perhaps should have said before. Then say it. I am Arthur Whitmore's attorney. I was his attorney. The document I hold and the instructions I maintain were given to me by Arthur, and they represent his wishes, and my professional obligation is to those wishes and to the beneficiaries named in the document. Not to Whitmore Industries. Not to you personally. Silence. I understand that, Marcus said. I want to make sure that you understand it clearly, Raymond said, because I've had a sense in our recent conversations that there may be some confusion about whose interests I represent. There's no confusion, Marcus said. His voice was perfectly level. You represent Arthur's estate. Precisely, Raymond said. I'm glad we're clear. Lily heard a chair scrape, the sounds of a meeting concluding, the particular rhythms of two men who have said what they needed to say and are now moving toward the door. She moved quickly and quietly down the hall and into the room she used and sat on the edge of the bed and held her phone in both hands and thought. Biometric documentation. Biometric keys. Unique. The beneficiaries named in the document. She thought about what Ethan had said months ago when they had found the old photograph in a box in the basement of this very house. Why does Marcus have photos of a man he says walked away from everything? Why does he keep them in a locked box if he doesn't care? She thought about the way Marcus reacted whenever either of them asked questions about their grandfather's company, about succession, about the future. She thought about the particular quality of Marcus's control. Not the control of a man who owned something, but the control of a man who needed to keep owning it. She took out her phone and typed a message to Ethan. We need to look into something. Not now, when we're home. Ethan's reply came back in 30 seconds. What is it? She thought about how to say it in a text message in a building where Marcus had the Wi-Fi password and, theoretically, the ability to see anything that passed through his network. She typed, something about the company grandfather built, and why certain documents can only be opened by specific people. A long pause, then, okay. Then after another pause, Lily. Did you find something? She looked at the message and thought about biometric keys and sealed archives and a lawyer who had reminded Marcus very carefully whose interests he actually represented. She typed, I think we're looking for the wrong thing. I think it's not about finding Dad. I think it's about why Marcus needs us not to find him. She put the phone in her pocket and looked out the window at the gray sky over Manhattan, and she thought about a scar on a left hand and a paper cup, and a man who read a 4-day-old newspaper over the top of which he watched the street. On the following Tuesday, they went back to the corner. This time, Lily went alone. Ethan had agreed reluctantly after a long argument on Sunday evening in which Lily had laid out her reasoning with the precision of a closing argument that one of them approaching alone was more manageable than two, and that Lily going alone was better than Ethan going alone because Lily was less likely to do something irreversible out of emotion. This was true. They both knew it was true. Ethan did not like it, but he was honest enough to concede the point. Lily walked to the corner at 7:45, 15 minutes before the first bell, and sat down on the other end of the ledge with the directional confidence of someone who had decided something and was executing it. Daniel had the newspaper again. He lowered it and looked at her. "My brother stayed back," she said. "It's just me." He said nothing. "I heard something on Saturday," she said, "at Marcus's house. I wasn't eavesdropping on purpose, I just heard. It was about documents. Biometric documents, legal things." She paused. "I think whatever you're doing, whatever reason you're still here, still doing this, I think it involves those documents. And I think those documents involve us." The newspaper went very flat in his hands. He was looking at her with an expression she could not read because she had no stored history of this face to read against, no baseline, no comparison point, no memories of what this man looked like when he was surprised, or when something she said hit close to what he was carrying. "I'm not going to tell my mother," she said. "Not yet. I understand that you have reasons for not wanting that." She held his gaze. "I just want you to know that we're not going to stop. Ethan won't stop, and honestly, neither will I. So I'd rather this be something we're doing together instead of something you're fighting against." Daniel looked at her for a long time. The morning light was still low and gray, the particular flat light of a city October that made everything look like it was holding its breath. "You're very like your mother," he said finally. It was the first full sentence he had offered, and it arrived with the weight of something that had been held back for a while. "Everyone says I'm like you," Lily said. Something crossed his face that was too fast for her to name. He looked away down the street. "The biometric documentation," he said, still not looking at her. "You can't unknow it. Whatever I tell you now, you can't put it back." "I already know something," she said. "I'd rather know the rest." A long, long pause. Traffic, the cold. Somewhere down the block, someone was running a delivery cart over a sidewalk grate, and it rang like a low, flat bell. "Come back Thursday," he said. 7:30, alone. "And Lily, don't take your usual route. Come down 72nd instead of 73rd. She looked at him. "Is someone watching?" "Someone is always watching," he said. "I just need you to understand what you're walking into before you take another step." She stood up from the ledge and picked up her bag. She looked at him one more time, at the face she was trying to build a history for. In real time, reading it the way she read everything, looking for the structure beneath the surface. "Thursday," she said. She walked into school. Daniel watched her go, and the trembling in his left hand had moved by Thursday from the hand to somewhere deeper and harder to name. Chapter 3. The Man Who Chose to Disappear. Thursday arrived with rain. Lily came down 72nd Street at 7:25, 5 minutes early, with the hood of her jacket up and her head angled slightly against the weather, so that her face was partially obscured from the camera she had identified on the southeast corner of 73rd and 5th. The camera she had not noticed before last week and had gone back to look at carefully on Wednesday afternoon while pretending to check her phone. It was mounted on the upper corner of a brick building and angled to cover the cross street and the ledge. It was not a city camera. City cameras had visible municipal markings. This one was smaller private and positioned with the specific intentionality of something that was watching one location in particular. Marcus had eyes on the corner. She filed that fact alongside the others she was collecting, building the map, identifying the intersections, and came around to the ledge from the far side so that the camera's angle would show only her back. Daniel was waiting. He had arrived before her and was sitting with a different quality of stillness than before. Not the stillness of someone hiding, but the stillness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for it to begin. He was holding a canvas bag on his lap, not his usual canvas jacket, though the jacket was on. And he looked up when she came around the corner, and the look in his eyes was different. Still careful, still controlled, but open in a way the previous looks had not been. The door no longer just catching itself against the draft, but held deliberately ajar. "The camera on the corner," she said as she sat down. "I know," he said. "You've been sitting in its range the entire time." "No," he said. "The ledge is just outside the frame. I checked the first week." He looked at her steadily. "I'm glad you noticed it. It's a good sign." "That I noticed security cameras?" "That you think operationally," he said. It came out with the sound of a reflex, a thing he would have said without thinking in a different life, in a different context. And then his expression shifted slightly with the recognition of what he had just said and to whom. Lily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Thursday, you said you'd tell me what I'm walking into." He nodded. He looked down at the bag on his lap, and then he looked up at the gray sky over Manhattan. And then he seemed to do something internally that involved a long breath and a deliberate loosening of the muscles around his jaw. The way someone does when they have been carrying tension so long that the act of releasing it requires conscious instruction. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he said. "I'm your father. And I've been in this city, in this neighborhood, for 4 months and 12 days. And before you ask why I didn't come to you sooner, the answer is complicated. And some of it is good reasons, and some of it is the kind of reason that isn't a reason so much as a thing you did and now have to live with." Lily held very still. "When you were 4 years old," he said, "I was in a car accident. Not an accident the way the word usually means. The car I was driving the braking system had been interfered with. The police report said brake failure due to maintenance neglect. That report was wrong, but I was in a coma for 11 weeks. And by the time I was functional enough to understand what the report said, the legal landscape had already changed." His voice was steady, factual. The voice of a man who had rehearsed these sentences so many times they had acquired the smoothness of worn stone. The custody arrangement had been finalized during my incapacitation. Marcus had been appointed temporary guardian pending the outcome of my medical situation, and when it became clear that my recovery was going to be significant and prolonged, the court, based on documentation I later found to be falsified, converted the temporary arrangement to permanent guardianship. By the time I was well enough to contest it, the records showed that I had signed documents releasing my parental rights. I had not signed those documents. I had been in a medically induced coma when they were supposedly signed. Lily heard all of this in the particular way she heard things when the information was very large, as if her mind had shifted registers slightly, moving from the normal mode of hearing as experience to something more like recording, filing everything for examination later when she would have the space to feel it fully. "Why didn't you fight it?" she asked. "Legally, in court." "I tried," he said, "for about 8 months. But the documents were very well made, and the people Marcus had retained were very good lawyers, and the accident had taken something from me physically that took longer than I expected to get back. And at a certain point, I understood that fighting him through the standard channels was not going to work, because he had built the standard channels to point away from the truth." He paused. "So I made a different decision. You disappeared." "I changed my approach," he said, which looked like disappearing from the outside. Lily looked at the canvas bag. "The documentation," she said. "You've been building a case." He looked at her without speaking for a moment. Something moved in his expression, the same quality of involuntary feeling she had been reading since Saturday, the thing he could not entirely contain and had stopped trying entirely to contain in the last 4 minutes. "Yes," he said. 2 years of it. I'm 8 weeks from having everything I need to go to the DA's office and to the civil court simultaneously in a way that Marcus can't paper over." 8 weeks, she said. 8 weeks, he said. What happens if Marcus figures out what you're doing before then? Daniel's expression did not change, but something behind it did. Went still in a different way. A darker way. "He makes it harder," he said. "Or he tries to. He's tried before. I've been careful." Lily looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the hollow of his cheeks, the gray in his hair, the way his jacket had been patched at the left elbow with different colored thread. 10 years. She thought about 10 years on the other side of that room in the townhouse that Marcus kept for her as a gesture of permanence. The driver, the private school, the vacations in the Hamptons, the life that had been arranged for her and Ethan with such careful generosity. She had understood somewhere in the back of her mind that the generosity was a frame. She had not known until this moment what it was framing. "Does my mother know?" she asked. Something shifted in his face at the word mother. It was not pain exactly. It was more complicated than pain. "Your mother was shown documentation," he said carefully. "The same falsified record that the court saw. She was told she was given a reason to believe that I had signed those documents voluntarily. She believed it." A long pause. "Your mother," he said slowly, "had reasons to find it believable. I was not. Before the accident, I was not easy. The pressure of the company, the expectations, our relationship, there were things between us that I hadn't handled well. So when Marcus showed her a document that said I had voluntarily stepped away, she had enough history to make that story feel possible." He stopped. "I'm not saying she was wrong to believe it. I'm saying Marcus understood her history well enough to build the story around it." Lily thought about this. She thought about the particular way her mother sometimes went quiet when Ethan or Lily asked about their father. Not closed exactly, but contained. As if there were feelings attached to the subject that she had organized very carefully and did not want disrupted. She thought about the word "walked away" and how her mother always used it without venom, which had always struck Lily as strange. Not like a woman who had been abandoned, like a woman who had accepted a conclusion she had been guided toward. "I need to tell Ethan," Lily said. "I told him I would come back and tell him. He's not going to not know." "I know," Daniel said. "I expected that." He paused. "Tell him. Tell him all of it. But the two of you can't change anything about how you live. You can't confront Marcus. You can't let him see that anything has changed. 8 weeks and everything I've built can be completed. If he gets a reason to move against me before then, he's already watching," Lily said. "The camera, the driver. He got nervous when Ethan looked at you last Tuesday." Daniel absorbed this without visible reaction, which told Lily that he had already calculated it. "Yes," he said, "I know. I moved the location of my secure materials after Tuesday. I'm more careful now than I was." He reached into the canvas bag and took out a small metal key, a locker key, the kind used for public storage facilities with a number stamped on the tag. He held it out. Lily looked at it without touching it. "What is that?" "Insurance," he said. "It's a key to a public locker at the 7th Avenue Transit Hub. There's a notebook in the locker. If anything happens to me, anything I need someone to get that notebook to Raymond Holt. He's a lawyer. He knows. He's been waiting." "Raymond Holt," Lily repeated. She said it with the particular tone of someone slotting a piece into a pattern, and Daniel noticed it. "You know that name," he said. "I heard Marcus say it on Saturday," she said. "They had a meeting. Holt told Marcus he represented the estate's interests, not Marcus personally. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. The rain had lightened to a fine mist and was catching in the fibers of his jacket and in his hair. And he looked at his daughter with an expression that had moved in the last 10 minutes from controlled to something more exposed than that something she understood was not a thing he showed to many people, or perhaps to anyone. The look of a person whose plan has been running on necessary isolation for so long that being seen is both relief and terror at once. "You've been thinking about this," he said. "I've been thinking about everything," she said. "I haven't had a choice." She took the key from his hand. She put it in the small interior pocket of her bag, the one with the zip that she used for things she did not want to lose. "I'll be careful," she said. She stood up because the bell was 3 minutes away and she needed to walk around to the main gate, and she did not want to arrive late and draw attention. She stood and picked up her bag and looked at her father, at this man who had spent 2 years on the street, organizing a legal case with the patience of a person who understood that the only way to win against a prepared enemy was to be more prepared. And she felt something that was too large and too new to name yet, that would need time and space before it became anything she could hold steadily. "Thursday next week," she said. "Thursday next week," he said. She walked away around the corner. She did not look back. Daniel sat on the ledge in the light rain and held the empty canvas bag in both hands and thought about the look on Lily's face when she had said, "I've been thinking about everything." He thought about what it meant that she had already found the camera on the corner, already decoded Marcus's defensive posture, already mapped the shape of the thing from the outside, and begun building toward the middle. She was 14 years old. She was, in ways that made him feel both pride and a grief he could not entirely separate from the pride, exactly what she should be. He had 8 weeks. He also had, for the first time since he had come to this corner 4 months ago, the feeling that 8 weeks might not be entirely within his control. The confrontation happened on a Wednesday, 16 days after Lily had taken the key. Ethan had been told everything Lily had come home on Thursday and sat on the edge of his bed and told him all of it. And Ethan had listened the way he listened to important things. Very still, very focused, his hands on his knees, not interrupting once. When she was done, he sat in silence for approximately 40 seconds, and then he said, "Okay, what do we do?" Which was exactly what she had expected him to say, and exactly the right thing. They had held the knowledge for 16 days and changed nothing visible. They had gone to school and come home and sat through meals with Marcus with the disciplined normalcy of two people who had decided together that the performance was the plan. Marcus had watched them. They had given him nothing to see. On Wednesday afternoon, though, Ethan could not hold it. They were sitting at dinner at the townhouse, Marcus hosting one of his weekly dinners, a small gathering of business contacts and their wives. The kind of dinner where the children were present as a kind of display of stability and normalcy, and one of Marcus's contacts, a man named Glenn Forrester, who ran something in media, was talking about the Whitmore Industries centennial celebration and how Arthur Whitmore's legacy would be remembered. And Marcus was speaking about legacy, with the smooth, practiced quality of someone who had given the speech before. And Ethan heard the word legacy and thought about a notebook in a locker at 7th Avenue, and a key in his sister's bag, and a man sitting in the rain on a ledge, and something in him that had been held under pressure for 16 days came unstuck. "Did Grandfather ever talk about what he wanted the company to become?" Ethan said. The conversation shifted. Marcus turned to look at him with the pleasant expression he used for the children in company, which was different from the expression he used when they were alone, warmer, more indulgent. The face of a man performing the role of devoted guardian for an audience that appreciated it. "Your grandfather had many ideas about the future," Marcus said pleasantly. "He was a visionary." Did he talk about who would run it eventually, Ethan said? Like, specifically? A beat. Short. Almost imperceptible. The table's rhythm did not change. Someone reached for wine. Someone laughed at something to their right. But Marcus's pleasant expression recalibrated by approximately 3 degrees in a direction that Ethan had learned to recognize over a lifetime of watching this man's face for the thing beneath the surface. He trusted the people he had put in place, Marcus said. He believed in continuity. Mom told me once, Ethan said, and here Lily pressed her foot very firmly against his under the table, which was both a warning and a support. I know what you're doing, and I'm with you. The grandfather had a phrase he always used about the company, that it belonged to the future. Marcus smiled. Your grandfather was a philosopher in addition to being a businessman. What did he mean by that? Ethan asked. The future. Did he mean specifically like his children's future or his grandchildren's? The smile did not move, but something behind Marcus's eyes moved. Something that was not anger exactly, but was the precursor to anger. The pressure that precedes the visible change in weather. He meant the company's future, Marcus said. The institution's continuity. Right, Ethan said, of course. He picked up his fork and went back to his food, and under the table Lily had not moved her foot, and the dinner continued around them with its normal rhythm, and Marcus watched Ethan for the rest of the meal with the expression of a man running a calculation he had not expected to need. After dinner in the upstairs hallway, Marcus found Ethan alone. Walk with me, he said. It was not a suggestion. They walked to the end of the hall to the window that looked out over the back garden, dark now in the October evening. Marcus stood with his hands in his pockets and looked out at the garden, and the posture was relaxed in the specific way that very controlled people are relaxed. Not the relaxation of ease, but the relaxation of strategic stillness. You've been asking a lot of questions lately, Marcus said. About your grandfather, about the company. I'm curious about my family, Ethan said. Is that strange? It's natural, Marcus said. He turned from the window. In the dimmer light of the hallway, his face was harder to read, which Ethan suspected was not accidental. Your grandfather was a great man. I understand wanting to know more about him. But there are things about the business, legal matters, financial structures that are complicated, that are best understood by adults who have the full context. He paused. I want you and your sister to focus on school, on your future. You have time to learn about the company. There's no rush. We're 14, Ethan said, not 4. Marcus looked at him. No, he said, you're not. Something moved in his expression, something that was almost genuine, almost unguarded, as if Ethan's directness had caught him slightly off balance. You're both very intelligent, I know that. He paused. Which is exactly why I'm asking you to be patient. Trust me, there are things being handled that will become clear when the time is right. Ethan looked at his uncle. He thought about a man in a canvas jacket in the rain. He thought about the word handled and what it meant in this context. Okay, Ethan said. I trust you, Uncle Marcus. He went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time. In the next room, through the wall, he could hear Lily's light still on. Marcus went back to his office and made a phone call, his voice speaking in a low, controlled register to the person on the other end of the line, contained none of the pleasant warmth of the dinner table. It contained instead a particular quality of decision, the compressed, dense quality of someone who has finished deliberating and moved into action. Find him, Marcus said, tonight. I don't need you to do anything else yet. Just find him, and make sure that when you find him, he knows we've been looking. Chapter 4. The Will That Never Burned. They came for him on a Friday night 2 weeks after the dinner. Daniel had moved twice since Lily's warning, first to a shelter in Inwood at the northern tip of Manhattan, then to a room in a residential hotel in Washington Heights, where the owner, a Haitian woman named Marie Claire, who had known him in a previous chapter of his life, agreed to take cash and not maintain records. He had believed he was ahead of it. He had believed the move was clean. He had been wrong about the clean part, if not about the direction. The two men found him on his way back from a late meeting with a paralegal who had been helping him on a pro bono basis, arranged through a law clinic to format and authenticate the final tranche of his documentation. He was on 168th Street, half a block from the hotel, and they came from a parked car, with the practiced efficiency of people for whom this was a professional exercise. They did not have weapons. Not visible ones. What they had was numbers and the geometry of the street, and they communicated what they wanted with the economy of men who have had this kind of conversation before. Marcus Whitmore sends his regards. You should consider your current project concluded. Daniel was 41 years old and had spent a significant portion of the last decade in conditions that required physical adaptability. But he was also alone. And the street was quiet, and he was carrying a bag with documentation in it, and the calculation of how to protect the bag while managing two men was not in his favor. He ran. He ran 2 blocks, and they caught him at the corner, and what followed was brief and efficient, and left him with cracked ribs in the left side, a gash along his jaw from the pavement, and the bag. They had taken the bag. Which was the point? They had not hurt him past the point of delivering a message. What they had wanted was the bag. He let them have it. He had been carrying decoys for 6 weeks. The real documentation, all of it, the full 18 months of assembled evidence, the authenticated photographs, the notarized witness statements from 3 people who had been involved in the accident. The financial records that traced the movement of money from a private account controlled by Marcus to the brake specialist who had filed the maintenance report was in a sealed, waterproof case inside the locker at 7th Avenue behind the notebook with the key that Lily was carrying. Daniel sat on the corner of 168th Street for a few minutes after they left, taking inventory of himself the way you take inventory after a fall, checking each part in sequence, deciding what needed immediate attention and what could wait. The ribs were going to be the problem. Breathing hurt. Movement was going to be more difficult than usual. He made 3 calls from a burner phone. The first was to the paralegal to tell her that the meeting was compromised and she should clear any copies from her office. The second was to Raymond Holt's emergency line, a number he had memorized a year ago and used only now to say 4 words. It needs to move. The third call he considered for a long time before making, sitting on the cold sidewalk of 168th Street with his ribs sending bright signals up his left side. He made the third call to a number he had also had memorized years ago, and had not dialed once in 10 years, that he had carried in his mind like a stone in a pocket, present, always felt, constantly, never used. Celeste Whitmore's cell phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "This is Daniel," he said. I know what this is. I need you to come. I need you to come to a specific place tonight, and I need you to bring the children. I know there is no way to say this that makes sense right now. The corner of Grace and 7th in Brooklyn, the coffee shop that's closed on Friday nights. 9 o'clock. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. Please come. He ended the call. He stood up, carefully cradling his left side with his right arm, and he began walking toward the subway. And the night air was cold and clean and smelled like rain that had not yet started falling. Celeste Whitmore had been standing in the kitchen of the apartment on West End Avenue, the apartment she had bought herself with her own money after the divorce that had finalized the end of a marriage she had not entirely understood was over until the papers arrived, when the phone rang. She had looked at the screen. Unknown number, though the voice that followed was not unknown. Was in fact the opposite of unknown, was the most immediately recognizable voice she had heard in 10 years. Even rough and slightly strained and coming from somewhere that sounded like outdoors and discomfort. She listened to the message 3 times. Then she went to the hallway and stood outside Ethan's door, and she knocked. And when he said, "Come in," she opened the door and looked at her son, at his face, which was his father's face in the bones, and his own face in the expression. And she said quietly, "I need you to get your sister. I need both of you dressed and ready to leave in 20 minutes. And I need you to tell me what you know." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "How much do you want to know?" "Everything," Celeste said, "from the beginning." The coffee shop on Grace and 7th in Brooklyn was dark and locked, and its interior was visible through the plate glass front only as the shapes of chairs on tables and the faint amber glow of a streetlight filtering through. Daniel was sitting on the step outside the door, his back against the glass, his right arm pressed across his midsection. He had found a clean cloth somewhere and pressed it against the cut on his jaw, and the cloth had gone mostly dark. A car pulled up to the curb. Celeste got out first, then Ethan and Lily from the back seat, and they came onto the sidewalk, and the 4 of them were in the same space for the first time in 10 years, under a street lamp on a Brooklyn corner, with the traffic on Atlantic Avenue audible in the distance, and the night air cold and sharp around them. Celeste looked at Daniel. He looked at her. He was aware in an acute and comprehensive way of everything that he looked like. The beard, the jacket, the makeshift cloth against his jaw, the careful way he was holding himself to manage the ribs. He was aware that whatever she was seeing was not what she had been married to 20 years ago, or even 15. He had no illusions about what time and that particular kind of life had done to him, and he had spent no energy constructing them. "You're hurt," Celeste said. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was the voice of a person who is receiving too much information at once and is finding a manageable entry point. "I'm functional," he said. "I'll explain the rest." She looked at him for another moment, and in her eyes, in the space between the first look and the second, he saw something move that he recognized the shape of, even after 10 years, the complicated interior weather of Celeste. The way feeling moved through her, not as a wave, but as a series of smaller shifts, each one discreet and considered. He had loved that about her. He had also, in his worst moments, found it maddening. The feelings had not changed. Neither had the recognition of them. "Then explain," she said. He did. He told her everything in the order it had happened. The accident, the weeks in the coma, the documents he had not signed, the custody arrangement he had emerged from unconsciousness to find already finalized, the 8 months of legal attempts that went nowhere, the decision to change his approach. He told her about Marcus's system, how it was built, what it relied on, what it was designed to protect. He told her about the 2 years of documentation the paralegal Raymond Holt, the timeline that had been 8 weeks away before tonight. He told her about the camera on the school corner. He told her about the locker key. He told her that he had sat on that corner for 4 months watching his children walk into school every morning because he could not make himself not. Celeste stood in the cold and listened to all of it with the stillness that he remembered and that Lily had inherited. And she did not interrupt, and she did not cry, and she did not look away from his face for any of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The document," she finally said. "The biometric document, the will." Daniel reached inside his jacket. He was carrying the actual documentation now, not in the decoy bag, but on his person. The final and most important piece. The piece he had been most careful about. And he produced a folded set of pages, sealed in a waterproof envelope, and held it out. Celeste did not take it. "Tell me what it says," she said. "My father changed his will 11 months before he died," Daniel said. "Raymond Holt drew it up and witnessed it and sealed it in a digital archive with a biometric activation protocol. The will does not leave the company to me and does not leave it to Marcus. It leaves controlling interest in Whitmore Industries to Ethan and Lily. In trust, with independent oversight until they turn 25. He paused. Marcus knew. Marcus was in the room when my father told him. My father believed correctly that leaving it to either of his sons directly would create a conflict. He wanted it to go past us entirely. The silence that followed this was very complete. Ethan, who had been standing slightly back from the group with his hands in his jacket pockets and his jaw tight, spoke for the first time since the parking lot. "So Marcus didn't want to control Dad's company," he said. "He wanted to control us." "Yes," Daniel said. Lily had been standing beside her brother with her arms crossed, and she had the look of someone rearranging furniture in a room that is much larger than it appeared, making space for new information by shifting the old. "The biometric requirement," she said. "Fingerprints, retinal scan." "Fingerprints, specifically the prints of Arthur Whitmore's biological grandchildren." Daniel looked at his daughter. "There are two of them." Ethan and Lily looked at each other. In the private language that was purely theirs without words, something passed between them. A very fast conversation about something that had already been decided. A confirmation of a plan they had been working toward without knowing its full shape until just now. "Raymond Holt," Lily said. "You said his archive holds the will. His office holds the activation interface," Daniel said. "The archive is distributed in 3 separate secure locations. The interface requires the biometric input to compile and activate the full document. Without the biometric keys, the will can be proven to exist, but cannot be formally executed." "Marcus must have tried to get at the archive," Celeste said. It was not a question. "For years," Daniel said, "Raymond Holt has been... He's been more resistant than Marcus expected. But Marcus's leverage over him is financial. He controls the Whitmore account that funds Holt's retainer. If he terminates the relationship, he can claim conflict of interest and potentially argue for a new executor. It's not clean, but it's a risk Holt has been navigating." Celeste looked at him for a long moment. The cold was sharpening the air around them, and somewhere down Atlantic a siren moved through the night and faded. She looked at him with the expression of a woman processing not just the facts, but the 10 years behind the facts, the decade of a story she had been given that was not the story that had happened. "You didn't trust me," she said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement delivered with the flat precision of someone naming something accurately. Daniel held her gaze. "I didn't trust my own plan enough to risk involving you before it was complete. I thought protecting you meant keeping you outside of it." He paused. "I was wrong about that. I've known for a while that I was wrong about that." "Why didn't you—" She stopped. She recalibrated. "Why didn't you call sooner, tonight, before you were hurt?" "Because I was afraid," he said, and the simplicity of it landed in the space between them with the weight of something that had been held for a long time. "I've been afraid, Celeste, for 10 years. Not of Marcus. Of you. Of this. Of standing in front of you, looking like this, and having to say I spent a decade building a case instead of coming home." The street was quiet around them. Ethan had turned to look at the distant traffic on Atlantic. Lily was looking at the ground, giving them the small privacy that was available. Celeste said quietly, "You came back every year. You wrote that on the photograph." Daniel looked at her. He had not known she knew about the photograph. He had not known the photograph existed outside of Ethan's notebook until this moment. Something moved through him that was too large and too sudden to stay organized. Not grief exactly, not hope exactly, but the specific feeling that arrives when you discover that the gap between two people is both wider and narrower than you thought. A simultaneous expansion and collapse. "I came back every year," he said. "I just didn't know how to knock." Celeste looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the cut on his jaw, the careful way he was holding his ribs, the cloth that had gone dark. "We need to get you to an emergency room," she said. "Not yet," Daniel said. "Marcus will have people watching emergency rooms. If I check in under my name—" "We won't use your name," she said. "I know a doctor. She's a friend. She'll come." She took out her phone. Before she could dial, Ethan said, "There's something else we need to deal with. Tonight." They all looked at him. "Marcus is going to figure out, probably by morning, that the bag had decoys and the real documentation is still out there," Ethan said. "He's going to move faster now. The 8 weeks is gone. Whatever happens next has to happen before he can get to Raymond Holt." Daniel looked at his son. His 14-year-old son, who was standing on a Brooklyn sidewalk at 9:30 on a Friday night, having just been told that his grandfather's empire was legally his and his sister's, and whose response to that information was to assess the operational timeline. He thought with a compound feeling he had no single word for. "There you are." "Yes," Daniel said. "We need to move it to Monday, the archive activation. We go to Raymond Holt on Monday." "And Marcus," Lily said. "When he figures out Monday is happening—" Daniel looked at the envelope in his hands. He looked at Celeste, who had put her phone to her ear and was speaking in a low voice to someone who would come and not ask questions. He looked at his children, these two 14-year-olds who had walked through the last month with an intelligence and a courage that he had not arranged for them and could not claim credit for, and could only stand in front of and acknowledge. "Then we deal with Marcus," he said. "Together. The way we should have dealt with everything." Celeste lowered the phone. "She'll be here in 30 minutes, she said. She looked at Daniel. "Can you sit?" He sat down on the step again. Celeste sat beside him, not touching him, not yet, but near enough that her shoulder was adjacent to his, and the warmth of that proximity was in the cold night air of Brooklyn more than a small thing. The children sat on the bottom step below them, and the four of them waited in the quiet, and above them the streetlight held its small circle of amber light against the dark, and Manhattan across the river was a wall of lit windows. And somewhere behind those windows, Marcus Whitmore was opening a bag that contained nothing useful and beginning to understand that something had gone wrong. Chapter 5. The Heirs Come Home. Monday, 9:15 a.m., Whitmore Industries Building, 42nd floor. The call Marcus Whitmore had been dreading came on Sunday evening, not from the men he had sent to Washington Heights who had confirmed the bag's contents were useless, but from his head of legal, who had received a notification from Raymond Holt's office that afternoon. A formal scheduling request for a client meeting Monday morning, 9 o'clock, identified as an estate activation proceeding. Marcus had read the notification twice. Then he had called his driver and his lawyer and two other people whose numbers he kept in memory rather than in contacts, and he had spent Sunday night constructing a response. The response was a plan built on his strongest remaining asset, which was not the bag with the decoy documents and was not the men on 168th Street. His strongest remaining asset was something he had built over 10 years, carefully and quietly in the background of everything else. A paper trail that implicated Celeste Whitmore in a series of financial irregularities in the charitable foundation she ran. Irregularities that Marcus had manufactured 3 years ago and maintained in sealed records, waiting for exactly this contingency. He had hoped never to use it. It was not clean. It was the kind of move that could be challenged and might eventually be dismantled. But eventually was the key word, because eventually was months of legal proceedings, and months was all Marcus needed. If Celeste was facing a criminal investigation, Daniel would stop. Daniel would trade the documentation for Celeste's safety. Marcus had watched Daniel for long enough to understand that whatever had broken between them, Daniel would not let Celeste take the fall. He arrived at the Whitmore Industries Tower at 7 Monday morning and had his lawyers place the sealed records with the DA's office at 7:45. He called Celeste at 8. She did not answer. He called Daniel's cell phone, a number he had obtained in the last 48 hours, and Daniel did not answer. He called Raymond Holt's office and was told by the receptionist that Mr. Holt was in a private meeting and unavailable. Marcus sat in his office on the 42nd floor and looked at the view of Midtown Manhattan and thought very carefully. He thought about the notification the Monday morning meeting, the biometric activation protocol that required the children's physical presence. He thought about what it meant that Daniel had surfaced and Celeste was not answering her phone. His lawyer appeared in the doorway at 8:55. "They're on their way up," the lawyer said. "Who told them they could come up?" Marcus said. "Security," the lawyer said with the expression of a man delivering news he did not choose. "Mrs. Whitmore, your sister-in-law, presented a court document at reception, a motion for emergency injunctive relief from a judge in the Southern District. It was filed at 7 this morning." He paused. "It grants them access to the building pending a hearing this afternoon." Marcus looked at him. "Who's the judge?" "Henderson," the lawyer said. Marcus absorbed this. Henderson was not one of his. Henderson was a Southern District federal judge with a 30-year reputation for disliking corporate maneuvers that interfered with estate law, and the fact that Daniel had gotten a motion in front of Henderson at 7 in the morning on a Monday meant that Raymond Holt had been doing more than waiting. The door to the conference room opened. They came in together, Celeste and Daniel, and behind them Ethan and Lily, who were supposed to be in school and were not in school, and who stood in the doorway of the 42nd floor conference room of the company their grandfather had built with the particular composure of two people who have decided something and will not be moved from it. Daniel looked like what he was, a man who had spent the weekend with cracked ribs and a sutured jaw cut. And he also looked Marcus registered with the precision of someone assessing a threat, like a man who was no longer operating under any constraint of caution. Marcus stood. He kept his face neutral. He had spent his life keeping his face neutral in conferences rooms, and he was very good at it. "Daniel," he said, "this is unexpected." "It really shouldn't be," Daniel said. "I think you all should sit down," Marcus said. "There are some things I'd like to—" "I don't think so," Celeste said. Marcus looked at her. Celeste had the same quality of stillness she always had, but beneath the stillness today was something he had not seen there before. Not anger exactly, but the specific quality of clarity that arrives when a person has had all of the relevant information for 36 hours and has had time to organize their feelings around it. "Marcus," she said, "your lawyers filed records with the DA's office this morning about my foundation. That's a matter being handled by—" "Those records are fabricated," she said. "You built them 3 years ago. We know this because Daniel has the original bank records showing that the transactions you've attributed to me were actually routed through a shell account in the Cayman Islands that is registered to a holding company that you control. Our lawyers filed that information with the DA at 7:15 this morning, 15 minutes after your filing." The conference room was very quiet. Marcus looked from Celeste to Daniel. Daniel was watching him with the expression of a man who has been carrying a particular weight for a very long time and has just put it down. "You want to discuss the foundation?" Marcus said carefully. "We can discuss it. I can explain." "You can explain it to the Southern District Judge at 2 o'clock this afternoon," Daniel said. Along with the brake maintenance report, the signature that was forged on the parental rights document while I was in a coma, and the financial records showing payment from your private account to Roy Garrett, who was the mechanic on call for my car in October 14 years ago, and who submitted a deposition to Raymond Holt's office on Saturday morning. He paused. Roy had a crisis of conscience, Marcus. It took 10 years, but it arrived. Marcus's face remained still. His hands at his sides did not. You're making claims, Marcus said. Without this is conjecture, and you don't have the documentation to. We have all the documentation, Daniel said. We have had it for 7 days. The version I was carrying on Friday night was decoys. You've known me long enough to know I would plan for you taking the bag. A long silence. Marcus looked at his brother. For a moment, a brief and undefended moment, something showed in his face that was not the calculated maneuver or the controlled executive. It was something older and uglier and more human than that. The look of a man who understands finally that the thing he did in the darkness a long time ago has survived into the light, and that the light is not going away. Dad changed the will, Marcus said. It was not a question. His voice had gone flat. He sat me down and told me he was changing it, and he told me what it said. You weren't even in the room. He said you were the better man for the job, and he sat me down like I was. He stopped. He looked at the table. I had given 40 years to that company, he said. 40 years. I know, Daniel said. He gave it to the children, Marcus said. He gave it to children who hadn't done anything. Because he decided, because he loved them, Daniel said. The same reason you should have. The same reason you had 10 years to choose differently and didn't. Marcus stood at the head of the conference table and looked around the room at Daniel, at Celeste, at the 2 children standing in the doorway, and Marcus Whitmore, who had controlled the shape of this family for a decade, who had arranged every piece of the board for 10 years with the patience of a man who believed that enough preparation made a position permanent, understood that the arrangement was over. His lawyer came in from the side door and leaned down to speak in his ear. Marcus listened. His face did not change. The motion was granted, his lawyer said. The hearing is at 2. Marcus straightened. He looked at Daniel once more, at his brother 10 years older and 10 years harder, and standing in a borrowed jacket with a sutured cut on his jaw, and something moved through his expression that was not quite regret and not quite anything else cleanly nameable. It was the expression of a man who made a choice a long time ago and is now completing the transaction. You should have come to me, Marcus said. When Dad told you, you should have. We could have negotiated. You didn't give me the chance, Daniel said. You put me in a coma first. Marcus had nothing to say to that. He sat down slowly in the chair at the head of the table, and he placed his hands flat on the polished surface of the conference table, and he looked at them. 2 of Marcus's men appeared in the hallway behind the children. Marcus did not look up from his hands. He said to no one in particular, to the table, to the room, "Tell them to stand down." 10:30 a.m. Office of Raymond Holt, East 44th Street. The office of Holt and Sinclair Estate Law occupied the 4th floor of a narrow building on East 44th, a building that had not been renovated since 1987 and whose elevator moved at the pace of institutional patience. Raymond Holt's office itself was lined with dark wood shelves and smelled like paper and old coffee and the particular kind of time that accumulates in rooms where important things have been decided quietly. Raymond Holt was standing when they arrived. He was 73 years old, and he had the look of a man who had waited a long time for a specific thing and was experiencing, in the moment of its arrival, something more complicated than simple relief. "Ethan," he said. "Lily." He said their names with the deliberateness of someone who has thought about saying them for years. "Your grandfather spoke about you often. In the last months, it was mostly about you." Ethan looked at the man who had known their grandfather. "He was protecting us," he said. "The will. He knew what Marcus would do if it was straightforward." "He knew his sons," Raymond said simply. "He loved them both. He also knew them." He gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "Please, sit down. All of you." They sat, Daniel and Celeste side by side, Ethan and Lily across from Raymond, the four of them filling the small office with a weight of occasion that Raymond Holt clearly felt. The way he moved and spoke and arranged the papers on his desk. He produced a tablet with a biometric reader attached to it, a clean, modern piece of equipment that looked incongruous against the dark wood in the old paper. "The protocol requires sequential input," Raymond said. "Left hand first, then right. Both twins. It will take approximately 40 seconds to compile once the input is received." He looked at Ethan and Lily. "When your grandfather set this up, he asked me what I thought about requiring 2 sets of biometric keys instead of 1. I told him it was more complicated. He said that was the point. He wanted it to require both of you, together." Lily placed her left hand on the reader. The light turned green. She placed her right hand, another green. Ethan placed his left hand, his right. The tablet's screen displayed a progress bar. Raymond watched it. The room was very quiet, the particular quiet of a room where something is being completed, where the end of a long process has arrived and everyone in the room is feeling the weight of what was carried to get here. The progress bar filled to 80% and stopped. The light on the reader turned amber. Raymond frowned. He leaned forward and looked at the screen with the expression of a man who has prepared for every contingency and is encountering one he did not prepare for. He tapped the screen. He looked at a status indicator in the corner. His frown deepened. "There's a secondary verification request," he said. "This shouldn't be here. This wasn't part of the original protocol." He looked at the screen more carefully. "It's asking for a verbal passphrase, a secondary activation code I don't have in my records." Silence. Ethan looked at Lily. Lily was looking at the screen. Her face had gone to the still quality, the inventory quality, the looking at everything as if reading it quality that was her face when she was doing the deepest form of thinking. "Grandfather talked to you?" Raymond said, looking at Lily. "He was close to you in the last months. Was there anything he said that was unusual? Something that felt like a game or a puzzle?" Lily stood up from her chair. She stood in front of the tablet reader and she looked at the amber light. She thought about the last time she had seen her grandfather. She had been 9 years old and they had been in his study and he had been showing her the collection of antique keys he kept in a glass case, on the shelf keys of various shapes and sizes, each with a small label, each representing a different lock he had encountered in his life. He had explained each one to her with the patient pleasure of a man sharing something he loved. And then at the end, he had said in the particular voice he used for things he wanted her to remember, "The most important locks, Lilybird, are the ones you build yourself. And the key to those should only ever be a word that belongs entirely to the person who will need to open them." And then he had told her the word. She had been 9 years old. She had thought it was a game. She had filed it away in the particular interior drawer where she kept things that mattered without yet knowing why they mattered, and she had not thought about it for 5 years. She looked at the amber light. She said quietly a single word. A word that had no obvious connection to Whitmore Industries or a state law or biometric protocols. A word that was simply the name of the street in Ohio where Arthur Whitmore had grown up. The street he had left at 18 years old with $40 and a suitcase. The street he had never gone back to but had spoken about once to a 9-year-old girl in a study full of antique keys. The light turned green. The progress bar completed. The archive compiled in the 40 seconds Raymond had estimated into a fully executed document, notarized, witnessed, digitally authenticated in 3 separate locations, transferring controlling interest in Whitmore Industries in trust to Ethan Arthur Whitmore and Lily Grace Whitmore, effective immediately upon legal challenge, with Raymond Holt as independent trustee until the twins reached 25. Raymond printed 2 copies, signed both, stamped both, with the notarial seal, and handed one to Daniel and one to the twins. He did this with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man executing a task he has been ready to perform for a long time. He looked at Lily. "He told you?" he said. "He told me," she said. Raymond nodded once. He sat back in his chair, and for a moment the careful, neutral quality that was his professional armor fell away, and he simply looked tired. The tiredness of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a very long time. And then he straightened and looked at all 4 of them and said, "I believe you have a hearing this afternoon." "We do," Daniel said. "Then I'll see you there," Raymond said. "It's been a long time coming." 6:45 p.m., Presbyterian Hospital Corridor, Manhattan. The 2 o'clock hearing lasted 3 hours. Marcus did not contest the will in the end. His lawyers had advised him that the combination of the authenticated document, the Roy Garrett deposition, the forensic analysis of the parental rights signature, and the Cayman Islands financial records created an evidentiary landscape that made any challenge not merely difficult, but inadvisable in terms of what additional information might surface during discovery. Marcus was led out of the Southern District Courthouse at 5:45, not in handcuffs, not yet, but accompanied by 2 federal agents and his criminal defense lawyer, who had been called in the previous hour when it became clear that the fraud and conspiracy charges being developed by the DA's office were going to require dedicated representation. Daniel's ribs had been tolerated through the day on the particular combination of adrenaline and necessity that sustains injured people through things that need to be done. By 6 o'clock, the adrenaline had withdrawn its support, and Celeste had driven him to Presbyterian and stood next to him in the intake area while he told the attending physician, using his actual name, that he had a probable rib fracture on the left side and a sutured laceration on the jaw. The attending had looked at him and at Celeste and at the 2 teenagers who followed them through the door, and had decided with the pragmatism of a Manhattan emergency physician that this was not the most unusual family configuration she had processed in a Monday evening shift. The X-rays confirmed 2 cracked ribs, not broken, not requiring surgery, requiring rest, which the attending said with the weary emphasis of a person who does not expect to be obeyed. Now it was 6:45, and Daniel was sitting in a chair in the hallway outside the imaging suite with a bandage wrap under his shirt and a bottle of water in his hand. And Celeste was sitting in the chair beside him. The children had gone with a hospital social worker to get food from the cafeteria at Celeste's gentle instruction. She had wanted 10 minutes, and they had understood, which was the particular grace of children who had spent the last month understanding things they were not supposed to know yet. The hallway was the kind of hallway that exists in every large hospital in every city. Institutional lighting, linoleum, the distant sounds of equipment and movement. The particular white noise quality of a place where serious things are happening in every direction. And your own serious thing is just one among many. Celeste was looking at the floor. Daniel was looking at his water bottle. "Why didn't you trust me?" she said. He had been waiting for this question. He had been waiting for it since Brooklyn, since Friday night, since the moment she had said, "You didn't trust me," outside the coffee shop, and they had not had time to go further because there were cracked ribs and a doctor to call and a case to execute. "I trusted you," he said. "I didn't trust myself." She looked at him. "I was ashamed," he said. I know that doesn't cover it. But I had been reduced to something I didn't recognize. And the thought of you seeing me that way..." He stopped. He tried again. "You'd already been shown a story about why I left. and the story had enough truth in it to hold not the ending, but the context. You knew I was struggling before the accident. You knew the marriage was under strain. Marcus built the story around things that were real, and I knew that, and I think I let myself believe that fighting the story would mean fighting the real things too. And I didn't know how to do that. And also put you in the middle of something dangerous. You could have told me it was dangerous, she said. I'm an adult. I have been for a while. Yes, he said. You spent 10 years protecting me from a choice I should have been allowed to make. Yes, he said again. The word was simple, and it was all there was to say. She looked back at the floor. In the institutional quiet of the hallway, she was doing the things she did. The inventory, the rearranging, the making of space for what was new alongside what had been. He watched her do it the way he had watched her do it 20 years ago across a conference table, the first time they had met. The way she moved through difficulty, not by avoiding it, but by mapping it carefully and then deciding where to put her feet. The photograph, she said, the one you wrote on. Ethan had it. I left it, he said. I was in the house once, 8 years ago. I still had a key that Marcus's people had missed when they changed the locks. I knew your schedule. I went in, and I looked at it. I needed to see how they were living, and I left the photograph because I needed to leave something of myself in the house, even if no one knew it was from me. He paused. Ethan found it. I didn't know that until last month. Celeste was quiet for a while. You came back every year, she said. That's what you wrote. I did, he said. She turned and looked at him fully, at his face, the new lines in it, the gray at his temples, the way 10 years had changed the landscape without changing the underlying structure. She looked at him the way she had always looked at difficult things, directly, without flinching, taking the full measure. I want you to know, she said, that I'm angry. I'm very angry. At Marcus, obviously, but also at you, for the decision you made. For 10 years of a decision I didn't get to be part of. I know, he said, and I need you to know that that anger is not, it doesn't mean. She stopped. She looked at the water bottle in his hand. It doesn't make the other things not true. The things that are also true. He did not fill the space she left. He had learned in 20 years of knowing her and 10 years of not knowing her that Celeste arrived at her own conclusions and that filling the space before she got there was the wrong move. You kept the photograph, she said, all those years. I kept it, he said. She reached out and put her hand on top of his, the hand with the water bottle, the left hand, the one with the scar, and she held it there, not gripping, not claiming, just there, her palm warm against the back of his hand. The way you place your hand on something to confirm it's real. They sat like that in the institutional quiet of the hallway with the distant sounds of the hospital around them, and neither of them said anything for a while. And neither of them needed to. Ethan and Lily came back from the cafeteria with sandwiches and 2 cups of coffee that were emphatically for the adults, and 2 sodas that were emphatically for themselves. And they came around the corner and saw their parents sitting in the hallway chairs with Celeste's hand on Daniel's hand. And they stopped for a moment at the corner without entering the hallway. Ethan looked at Lily. Lily looked at Ethan. Lily said quietly, "We should probably give them another minute." "Agreed," Ethan said. They leaned against the wall at the corner of the hallway, and Ethan opened his soda, and Lily looked at the ceiling, and they gave them another minute. In the weeks that followed, the things that happened were large and moved quickly in the way that legal and financial consequences tend to move when the documents are in order and the judge is Henderson, and the evidence has been assembled with 2 years of careful patience. Marcus Whitmore was indicted on charges including fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and the falsification of medical documents. His bail was set at a number that reflected the Southern District's assessment of his flight risk. The Whitmore Industries Board, responding to the executed will and the court order requiring the transition of controlling interest to the trust managed by Raymond Holt, convened an emergency session and voted with the pragmatic efficiency of people who understood which way the legal wind was blowing to support the transition. The Cayman Islands Shell Company was frozen pending investigation. The 3 Whitmore Industries executives who had worked in coordination with Marcus were placed on administrative leave pending their own proceedings. Roy Garrett's deposition was entered into the court record and was followed within 10 days by a deposition from a second person, the notary who had processed the forged parental rights signature, who had contacted Raymond Holt after seeing the news coverage of the hearing. Daniel Whitmore filed through his own legal representation and with Celeste's cooperation for the restoration of his parental rights. The motion was unopposed. The court approved it in a session that lasted 11 minutes, which Raymond Holt later noted was approximately 11 minutes shorter than it had any right to be, given the decade it had taken to get there, and which Daniel noted, to no one in particular, was the best 11 minutes he had experienced in a very long time. He did not move back into the apartment on West End Avenue. That was not where they were yet. What they were was a thing that was being rebuilt, carefully, from the foundation rather than from the roof, with the understanding that foundations take longer but hold better. Daniel found a sublet in the West Village and began for the first time in 10 years paying rent with his own name on a lease. He had dinner with Ethan and Lily twice a week and once a week with Celeste and the children together. And those dinners were sometimes easy and sometimes not. And the not easy ones were, he thought, the more important ones. Ethan and Lily returned to school the week after the hearing. Their classmates had seen the news coverage, which had been substantial. Whitmore twins at center of a state battle was the headline that ran in the business section of 3 major newspapers, and the school responded by calling a meetingless Celeste, expressing concern about the children's well-being and recommending counseling, which Celeste accepted with grace, and which both Ethan and Lily found more useful than they had expected. Raymond Holt sent the twins a formal letter on Holt and Sinclair letterhead, informing them of their status as beneficiaries of the Whitmore Estate Trust and outlining the structure of the independent oversight that would manage the trust's interests until they reached 25. The letter was thorough and formal and was written in language that required a dictionary for several passages, which Ethan noted was probably intentional and which Lily noted was probably just how Raymond Holt wrote. At the bottom of the letter, below the notarial seal and the formal signature, there was a handwritten postscript in a different ink in a slightly less formal hand that read, "Your grandfather was right about both of you. He usually was." They framed it. It hung in Lily's room above the desk where she did her homework. On a Saturday in December, 3 weeks after the hearing, Daniel stood on the sidewalk in front of the apartment building on West End Avenue and rang the buzzer for the 4th floor. The intercom crackled. "Yes, it's me," he said. A pause, then, "I know it's you. I have cameras." "I know you have cameras," he said. Another pause. Then the door buzzed open. He went up in the elevator and walked down the hall to the door of the apartment, which opened before he reached it because Celeste had heard the elevator the way you hear things you have been listening for, without admitting you've been listening. She stood in the doorway in the particular posture of a woman who has decided something and is waiting to execute it, not tentative, but deliberate, the way she approached everything. Behind her through the open doorway, he could see the apartment, the warm light from the living room, the jacket Lily had dropped on the floor by the door, in the specific way that she always dropped things, as if gravity had made her a better offer. The sound of Ethan's voice from somewhere in the back of the apartment, on a phone call he had not yet finished. Celeste looked at him. He looked at her. They were 2 adults in a hallway on a December Saturday, which was not the whole story and not the end of it either, but was where they were, which was the only place you could ever start. "They're inside," she said. "I know," he said. She stepped back. She held the door open. She let him in. He crossed the threshold into the light and the warmth and the sound of his children's voices, and the door closed behind him. And the hallway outside was empty, and the December night over Manhattan was clear and very cold and full of windows.